Chapter 1 of 10 Years Later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 1, in which D'Artagnan finishes at length, placing his hand upon his captain's commission. The reader guesses beforehand whom the usher preceded in announcing. The courier from Bretagne. This messenger was easily recognized. It was D'Artagnan, his clothes dusty, his face inflamed, his hair dripping with sweat, his legs stiff. He lifted his feet painfully at every step, on which resounded the clink of his blood-stained spurs. He perceived in the doorway he was passing through, the superintendent coming out. Fouquet bowed with a smile to him who, an hour before, was bringing him ruin and death. D'Artagnan found in his goodness of heart, and in his inexhaustible rigor of body, enough presence of mind to remember the kind reception of this man. He bowed then, also, much more from benevolence and compassion than from respect. He felt upon his lips the word which had so many times been repeated to the Duc de Guise, "Fly." But to pronounce that word would have been to betray his cause. To speak that word in the cabinet of the king and before an usher would have been to ruin himself gratuitously, and could save nobody. D'Artagnan, then, contented himself with bowing to Fouquet and entered. At this moment the king floated between the joy of the last words that Fouquet had given him, and his pleasure at the return of D'Artagnan. Without being a courtier, D'Artagnan had a glance as sure and as rapid as if he had been one. He read on his entrance devouring humiliation on the countenance of Colbert. He even heard the king say these words to him: "Ah, Monsieur Colbert, you have, then, 900,000 livres at this intendant's." Colbert, suffocated, bowed, but made no reply. All this scene entered into the mind of D'Artagnan by eyes and ears at once. The first word of Louis to his musketeer, as if he wished it to contrast with what he was saying at the moment, was a kind good day. His second was to send away Colbert. The latter left the king's cabinet, pallid and tottering, whilst D'Artagnan twisted up the ends of his moustache. "I love to see one of my servants in this disorder," said the king, admiring the martial stains upon the clothes of his envoy. "I thought, sire, my presence at the Louvre was sufficiently urgent to excuse my presenting myself thus before you." "You bring me great news, then, monsieur." "Sire, the thing is this, in 2 words. Belle Isle is fortified, admirably fortified. Belle Isle has double enceinte, a citadel, 2 detached forts. Its ports contain 3 corsairs, and the side batteries only await their cannon." "I know all that, monsieur," replied the king. "What, your majesty knows all that?" replied the musketeer, stupefied. "I have the plan of the fortifications of Belle Isle," said the king. "Your majesty has the plan?" "Here it is." "It is really correct, sire. I saw a similar one on the spot." D'Artagnan's brow became clouded. "Ah, I understand all. Your majesty did not trust to me alone, but sent some other person," said he in a reproachful tone. "Of what importance is the manner, monsieur, in which I have learned what I know, so that I know it?" "Sire, sire," said the musketeer, without seeking even to conceal his dissatisfaction, "but I must be permitted to say to your majesty that it is not worth while to make me use such speed, to risk 20 times the breaking of my neck, to salute me on my arrival with such intelligence. Sire, when people are not trusted, or are deemed insufficient, they should scarcely be employed." And D'Artagnan, with a movement perfectly military, stamped with his foot, and left upon the floor dust stained with blood. The king looked at him, inwardly enjoying his first triumph. "Monsieur," said he, at the expiration of a minute, "not only is Belle Isle known to me, but still further, Belle Isle is mine." That is well, sire. I ask but one more thing," replied D'Artagnan: "my discharge." "What, your discharge?" "Without doubt I am too proud to eat the bread of the king without earning it, or rather by gaining it badly. My discharge, sire." Oh! "I ask for my discharge, or I will take it. Are you angry, monsieur?" "I have reason, mordieu. 32 hours in the saddle. I ride day and night. I perform prodigies of speed. I arrive stiff as the corpse of the man who has been hung, and another arrives before me. Come, sire, I am a fool. My discharge, sire." "Monsieur d'Artagnan," said Louis, leaning his white hand upon the dusty arm of the musketeer, "what I tell you will not at all affect that which I promised you. A king's word given must be kept." And the king, going straight to his table, opened a drawer and took out a folded paper. "Here is your commission of captain of musketeers. You have won it, Monsieur d'Artagnan." D'Artagnan opened the paper eagerly, scanned it twice. He could scarcely believe his eyes. "And this commission is given you," continued the king, "not only on account of your journey to Belle Isle, but, moreover, for your brave intervention at the Place de Greve. There, likewise, you served me valiantly." "Ah, ah," said D'Artagnan, without his self-command being able to prevent a blush from mounting to his eyes. "You know that also, sire?" "Yes, I know it." The king possessed a piercing glance and an infallible judgment when it was his object to read men's mind. "You have something to say," said he to the musketeer, "something to say which you do not say. Come, speak freely, monsieur. You know that I told you, once and for all, that you are to always be quite frank with me." "Well, sire, what I have to say is this, that I would prefer being made captain of the Musketeers for having charged a battery at the head of my company, or taken a city, than for causing two wretches to be hung." "Is this quite true, you tell me? And why should your majesty suspect me of dissimulation, I ask?" "Because I have known you well, monsieur, you cannot repent of having drawn your sword for me." "Well, in that your majesty is deceived, and greatly. Yes, I do repent of having drawn my sword on account of the results that action produced. The poor men who were hung, sire, were neither your enemies nor mine, and they could not defend themselves." The king preserved silence for a moment. "And your companion, Monsieur d'Artagnan, does he partake of your repentance?" "My companion?" "Yes, you were not alone, I have been told." "Alone where?" "At the Place de Greve." "No, sire, no," said D'Artagnan, blushing at the idea that the king might have had a suspicion that he, D'Artagnan, had wished to engross himself all the glory that belonged to Raoul. "No, mordieu! And as your majesty says, I had a companion, and a good companion too." "A young man?" "Yes, sire, a young man. Oh, your majesty must accept my compliments. You are as well informed of things out of doors as things within. It is Monsieur Colbert who makes all these fine reports to the king." "Monsieur Colbert has said nothing but good of you, Monsieur d'Artagnan, and he would have met with a bad reception if he had come to tell me anything else." "That is fortunate." "But he also said much good of that young man." "And with justice," said the musketeer. "In short, it appears that this young man is a fire eater," said Louis, in order to sharpen the sentiments which he mistook for envy. "A fire eater, yes, sire," said D'Artagnan, delighted on his part to direct the king's attention to Raoul. "Do you not know his name?" "Well, I think you know him, then?" "I have known him nearly 25 years, sire." "Why, he is scarcely 25 years old," cried the king. "Well, sire, I have known him ever since he was born, that is all." "Do you affirm that?" "Sire," said D'Artagnan, "your majesty questions me with a mistrust in which I recognize another character than your own. Monsieur Colbert, who has so well informed you, has he not forgotten to tell you that this young man is the son of my most intimate friend?" "The Vicomte de Bragelonne?" "Certainly, sire. The father of the Vicomte de Bragelonne is Monsieur du Comte de la Fere, who so powerfully assisted in the restoration of King Charles II. Bragelonne comes of a valiant race, sire." "Then he is the son of that nobleman who came to me, or rather to Monsieur Mazarin, on the part of King Charles II, to offer me his alliance?" "Exactly, sire." "And the Comte de la Fere is a great soldier, you say?" "Sire, he is a man who has drawn his sword more times for the king, your father, than there are at present months in the happy life of your majesty." It was Louis XIV who now bit his lip. "That is well, Monsieur d'Artagnan, very well. And Monsieur le Comte de la Fere is your friend, you say?" "For about 40 years, yes, sire. Your majesty may see that I do not speak to you of yesterday." "Should you be glad to see this young man, Monsieur d'Artagnan?" "Delighted, sire." The king touched his bell, and an usher appeared. "Call Monsieur de Bragelonne," said the king. "Ah, ah! He is here?" said D'Artagnan. "He is on guard duty today at the Louvre, with the company of the gentlemen of Monsieur le Prince." The king had scarcely ceased speaking when Raoul presented himself, and on seeing D'Artagnan, smiled on him with that charming smile which is only found upon the lips of youth. "Come, come," said D'Artagnan, familiarly to Raoul, "the king will allow you to embrace me. Only tell his majesty you thank him." Raoul bowed so gracefully that Louis, to whom all superior qualities were pleasing when they did not overshadow his own, admired his beauty, strength, and modesty. "Monsieur," said the king, addressing Raoul, "I have asked Monsieur le Prince to be kind enough to give you up to me. I have received his reply, and you belong to me from this morning. Monsieur le Prince was a good master, but I hope you will not lose by the exchange." Yes, yes, Raoul, be satisfied. The king has some good in him, said D'Artagnan, who had fathomed the character of Louis, and who played with his self-love within certain limits, always observing, be it understood, the proprieties and flattering, even when he appeared to be bantering. Sire, said Bragelonne, with a voice soft and musical, and with the natural and easy elocution he inherited from his father, sire, it is not from today that I belong to your majesty. Oh, no, I know, said the king. You mean your enterprise of the Greve. That day you were truly mine, monsieur. Sire, it is not of that day I would speak. It would not become me to refer to so paltry a service in the presence of such a man as Monsieur d'Artagnan. I would speak of a circumstance which created an epoch in my life, and which consecrated me, from the age of 16, to the devoted service of your majesty. Ah, ah, said the king. And what was the circumstance? Tell me, monsieur. It is this, sire. When I was setting out on my first campaign, that is to say, to join the army of Monsieur le Prince, Monsieur le Comte de la Fere came to conduct me as far as Saint Denis, where the remains of King Louis XIII wait, upon the lowest steps of the funeral basilisk, a successor, whom God will not send him, I hope, for many years. Then he made me swear upon the ashes of our masters, to serve royalty, represented by you, incarnate in you, sire, to serve it in word, in thought, and in action. I swore, and God and the dead were witnesses to my oath. During 10 years, sire, I have not so often as I desired had occasion to keep it. I am a soldier of your majesty and nothing else, and, on calling me nearer to you, I do not change my master, I only change my garrison. Raoul was silent and bowed. Louis still listened after he had done speaking. Mordioux, cried D'Artagnan, that was well spoken, was it not, your majesty? A good race, a noble race. Yes, murmured the king, without, however, daring to manifest his emotion, for it had no other cause than contact with a nature intrinsically noble. Yes, monsieur, you say truly. Wherever you were the king's. But in changing your garrison, believe me, you will find an advancement of which you are worthy. Raoul saw that this ended what the king had to say to him, and with the perfect tact which characterized his refined nature, he bowed and retired. Is there anything else, monsieur, of which you have to inform me? Said the king, when he found himself again alone with D'Artagnan. Yes, sire, and I keep that news for last, for it is sad, and will clothe European royalty in mourning. What do you tell me? Sire, in passing through Blois, a sad word, echoed from the palace, struck my ear. In truth, you terrify me, Monsieur d'Artagnan. Sire, this word was pronounced to me by a piqueur who wore crape on his arm. My uncle Gaston of Orleans, perhaps. Sire, he has rendered his last sigh. And I was not warned of it, cried the king, whose royal susceptibility saw an insult in the absence of this intelligence. Oh, do not be angry, sire, said D'Artagnan. Neither the couriers of Paris, nor the couriers of the whole world can travel with your servant. The courier from Blois will not be here these 2 hours, and he rides well, I assure you, seeing that I only passed him on the thither side of Orleans. My uncle Gaston, murmured Louis, pressing his hand to his brow, and comprising in those 3 words all that his memory recalled of that symbol of opposing sentiments. Yea, yes, sire, it is thus, said D'Artagnan, philosophically replying to the royal thought. It is thus the past flies away. That is true, monsieur, that is true. But there remains for us, thank God, the future, and we will try to make it not too dark. I feel confidence in your majesty on that head, said D'Artagnan, bowing. And now, you are right, monsieur, I had forgotten the 100 leagues you have just ridden. Go, monsieur, take care of one of the best soldiers, and when you have reposed a little, come and place yourself at my disposal. Sire, absent or present, I am always yours. D'Artagnan bowed and retired. Then, as if he had only come from Fontainebleau, he quickly traversed the Louvre to rejoin Bragelonne. End of chapter 1. Recording by Tora. Of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas, Chapter 2, A Lover and His Mistress. Whilst the wax lights were burning in the castle of Blois around the inanimate body of Gaston of Orleans, the last representative of the past, whilst the bourgeois of the city were thinking out his epitaph, which was far from being a panegyric, whilst Madame the Dowager, no longer remembering that in her young days she had loved that senseless corpse to such a degree as to fly to the paternal palace for his sake, was making, within 20 paces of the funeral apartment, her little calculations of interest and her little sacrifices of pride. Other interests and other prides were in agitation in all parts of the castle in which a living soul could penetrate. Neither the lugubrious sounds of the bells, nor the voices of the chanters, nor the splendor of the wax lights through the windows, nor the preparations for a funeral, had power to divert the attention of two persons, placed at a window in the interior court, a window that we are acquainted with, and which lighted a chamber forming part of what were called the little apartments. For the rest, a joyous beam of the sun, for the sun appeared to care little for the loss France had just suffered. A sunbeam, we say, descended upon them, drawing perfumes from the neighboring flowers, and animating the walls themselves. These two persons, so occupied, not by the death of the duke, but by the conversation which was the consequence of that death, were a young woman and a young man. The latter personage, a man of from 25 to 26 years of age, with a mien sometimes lively and sometimes dull, making good use of two large eyes shaded with long eyelashes, was short of stature and swart of skin. He smiled with an enormous but well-furnished mouth, and his pointed chin, which appeared to enjoy a mobility nature does not ordinarily grant to that portion of the countenance, leant from time to time very lovingly towards his interlocutrix, who, we might say, did not always draw back so rapidly as strict propriety had a right to require. The young girl, we already know her, for we have already seen her, at that very same window, by the light of the same sun. The young girl presented a singular mixture of shyness and reflection. She was charming when she laughed, beautiful when she became serious. But let us hasten to say, she was more frequently charming than beautiful. These two appeared to have attained the culminating point of a discussion, half bantering, half serious. "Now, Monsieur Malicorne," said the young girl, "does it, at length, please you that we should talk reasonably?" "You believe that is very easy, Mademoiselle Aure," replied the young man, "to do what we like when we can only do what we are able." "Good! Then there he is bewildered in his phrases." "Who, I?" "Yes, you. Quit that lawyer's logic, my dear." "Another impossibility. Clerk I am, Mademoiselle de Montalais." "Demoiselle I am, Monsieur Malicorne." "Alas, I know it well, and you overwhelm me by your rank, so I will say no more to you." "Well, no, I don't overwhelm you. Say what you have to tell me. Say it, I insist upon it." "Well, I obey you." "That is truly fortunate." "Monsieur is dead." "Ah, peste! That's news. And where do you come from, to be able to tell us that?" "I come from Orleans, mademoiselle." "And is that all the news you bring?" "Ah, no, I am come to tell you that Madame Henrietta of England is coming to marry the king's brother." "Indeed, Malicorne, you are insupportable with your news of the last century. Now mind, if you persist in this bad habit of laughing at people, I will have you turned out." "Oh!" "Yes, for really you exasperate me." There, patience, mademoiselle. You want to make yourself of consequence. I know well enough why. Go." "Tell me, and I will answer you frankly. Yes, if the thing be true." "You know that I am anxious to have that commission of lady of honor, which I have been foolish enough to ask of you, and you do not use your credit." "Who, I?" Malicorne cast down his eyes, joined his hands, and assumed his sullen air. "And what credit can the poor clerk of a procurer have, pray?" "Your father has not 20,000 livres a year for nothing, Monsieur Malicorne." "A provincial fortune, Mademoiselle de Montalais." "Your father is not in the secrets of Monsieur le Prince for nothing. An advantage which is confined to lending Monseigneur money. In a word, you are not the most cunning young fellow in the provinces for nothing." "You flatter me." "Who, I?" "Yes, you." "How so?" "Since I maintain that I have no credit, and you maintain that I have." "Well, then, my commission." "Well, your commission." "Shall I have it, or shall I not?" "You shall have it." "Ay, but when?" "When you like it." "Where is it, then?" "In my pocket." "How? In your pocket?" "Yes." And, with a smile, Malicorne drew from his pocket a letter, upon which mademoiselle seized as a prey, and which she read eagerly. As she read, her face brightened. "Malicorne," cried she, after having read it, "in truth you are a good lad." "What for, mademoiselle?" "Because you might have been paid for this commission, and you have not." She burst into a loud laugh, thinking to put the clerk out of countenance, but Malicorne sustained the attack bravely. "I do not understand you," said he. It was now Montalais who was disconcerted in her turn. I have declared my sentiments to you, continued Malicorne. You have told me 3 times, laughing all the while, that you did not love me. You have embraced me once without laughing, and that is all I want. All, said the proud and coquettish Montalais, in a tone through which the wounded pride was visible. Absolutely all, mademoiselle, replied Malicorne. Ah! And this monosyllable indicated as much anger as the young man might have expected gratitude. He shook his head quietly. Listen, Montalais, said he, without heeding whether the familiarity pleased his mistress or not, let us not dispute about it. And why not? Because during the year which I have known you, you might have had me turned out of doors 20 times if I did not please you. Indeed, and on what account should I have turned you out? Because I have been sufficiently impertinent for that. Oh, that, yes, that's true. You see plainly that you are forced to avow it, said Malicorne. Monsieur Malicorne, don't let us be angry. If you have retained me, then it has not been without cause. It is not, at least, because I love you, cried Montalais. Granted, I will even say at this moment, I am certain you hate me. Oh, you have never spoken so truly. Well, on my part, I detest you. Ah, I take the act. Take it. You find me brutal and foolish. On my part, I find you have a harsh voice, and your face is too often distorted with anger. At this moment, you would allow yourself to be thrown out of the window rather than allow me to kiss the tip of your finger. I would precipitate myself from the top of the balcony rather than touch the hem of your robe. But in 5 minutes, you will love me, and I shall adore you. Oh, it is just so. I doubt it, and I swear it. Coxcomb! And then, that is not the true reason. You stand in need of me, Aure, and I of you. When it pleases you to be gay, I make you laugh, and when it suits me to be loving, I look at you. I have given you a commission of lady of honor which you wished for. You will give me presently something I wish for. I will? Yes, you will. But at this moment, my dear Aure, I declare to you that I wish for absolutely nothing, so be at ease. You are a frightful man, Malicorne. I was going to rejoice at getting this commission, and thus you quench my joy. Good, there is no time lost. You will rejoice when I am gone. Go then, and after, so be it. But in the first place, a piece of advice. What is it? Resume your good humor. You are ugly when you pout. Coarse! Come, let us tell the truth to each other while we are about it. Oh, Malicorne, bad-hearted man! Oh, Montalais, ungrateful girl! The young man leant with his elbow upon the window frame. Montalais took a book and opened it. Malicorne stood up, brushed his hat with his sleeve, smoothed down his black doublet. Montalais, though pretending to read, looked at him out of the corner of her eye. Good, cried she, furious. He has assumed his respectful air, and he will pout for a week. A fortnight, mademoiselle, said Malicorne, bowing. Montalais lifted up her little doubled fist. Monster, said she. Oh, that I were a man! What would you do to me? I would strangle you. Ah, very well then, said Malicorne. I believe I begin to desire something. And what do you desire, Monsieur Demon? That I should lose my soul from anger? Malicorne was rolling his hat respectfully between his fingers, but all at once he let fall his hat, seized the young girl by the shoulders, pulled her toward him, and sealed her mouth with 2 lips that were very warm from a man pretending to so much indifference. Aure would have cried out, but the cry was stifled in his kiss. Nervous and apparently angry, the young girl pushed Malicorne against the wall. Good, said Malicorne philosophically. That's enough for 6 weeks. Adieu, mademoiselle. Accept my very humble salutations. And he made 3 steps toward the door. Well, no, you shall not go, cried Montalais, stamping with her little foot. Stay where you are, I order you. You order me? Yes, am I not mistress? Of my heart and soul, without doubt. A pretty property, ma foi, the soul is silly and the heart dry. Beware, Montalais, I know you, said Malicorne. You are going to fall in love with your humble servant. Well, yes, said she, hanging round his neck with childish indolence, rather than with loving abandonment. Well, yes, for I must thank you at least. And for what? For the commission. Is it not my whole future? And mine. Montalais looked at him. It is frightful, said she, that one can never guess whether you are speaking seriously or not. I cannot speak more seriously. I was going to Paris. You are going there. We are going there. And so it was for that motive only you have served me, selfish fellow. What would you have me say, Aure? I cannot live without you. Well, in truth, it is just so with me. You are, nevertheless, it must be confessed, a very bad-hearted young man. Aure, my dear Aure, take care. For if you take to calling me names again, you know the effect they produce upon me, and I shall adore you." And so saying, Malicorne drew the young girl a second time towards him. But at that instant a step resounded on the staircase. The young people were so close that they would have been surprised in the arms of each other if Montalais had not violently pushed Malicorne, with his back against the door, just then opening. A loud cry, followed by angry reproaches, immediately resounded. It was Madame de Saint-Remy who uttered the cry and the angry words. The unlucky Malicorne almost crushed her between the wall and the door she was coming in at. "It is again that good-for-nothing," cried the old lady, "always here." "Ah, madame," replied Malicorne in a respectful tone, "it is 8 long days since I was here." End of chapter 2. Recording by Torah. 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 years later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 3, in which we at length see the true heroine of this history appear. Behind Madame de Saint-Remy stood Mademoiselle de la Valliere. She heard the explosion of maternal anger, and as she divined the cause of it, she entered the chamber trembling, and perceived the unlucky Malicorne, whose woeful countenance might have softened or set laughing whoever observed it coolly. He had promptly entrenched himself behind a large chair, as if to avoid the first attacks of Madame de Saint-Remy. He had no hopes of prevailing with words, for she spoke louder than he, and without stopping, but he reckoned upon the eloquence of his gestures. The old lady would neither listen to nor see anything. Malicorne had long been one of her antipathies, but her anger was too great not to overflow from Malicorne on his accomplice. Montalais had her turn. "And you, mademoiselle, you may be certain I shall inform madame of what is going on in the apartment of one of her ladies of honor." "Oh, dear mother!" cried Mademoiselle de la Valliere, "for mercy's sake, spare, hold your tongue, mademoiselle, and do not uselessly trouble yourself to intercede for unworthy people. That a young maid of honor like you should be subjected to a bad example is, certes, a misfortune great enough, but that you should sanction it by your indulgence is what I will not allow." "But in truth," said Montalais, rebelling again, "I do not know under what pretense you treat me thus. I am doing no harm, I suppose." "And that great good-for-nothing, mademoiselle," resumed Madame de Saint-Remy, pointing to Malicorne, "is he here to do any good, I ask you?" "He is neither here for good nor harm, madame. He comes to see me, that is all." "It is all very well," said the old lady. "Her royal highness shall be informed of it, and she will judge." "At all events, I do not see why," replied Montalais, "it should be forbidden Monsieur Malicorne to have intentions toward me, if his intentions are honorable." "Honorable intentions with such a face!" cried Madame de Saint-Remy. "I thank you in the name of my face, madame," said Malicorne. "Come, my daughter, come," continued Madame de Saint-Remy, "we will go and inform madame that at the very moment she is weeping for her husband, at the moment when all of us are weeping for a master in this old castle of Blois, the abode of grief, there are people who amuse themselves with flirtations." "Oh!" cried both of the accused with one voice. A maid of honor," cried the old lady, lifting her hands towards heaven. "Well, it is there you are mistaken, madame," said Montalais, highly exasperated. "I am no longer a maid of honor, of madame's at least." "Have you given in your resignation, mademoiselle? That is well. I cannot but applaud such a determination, and I do applaud it." "I do not give in my resignation, madame. I take another service, that is all." "In the bourgeoisie or in the robe?" asked Madame de Saint-Remy, disdainfully. "Please to learn, madame, that I am not a girl to serve either bourgeois or robins, and that instead of the miserable court at which you vegetate, I am going to reside in a court almost royal." "Ha, ha! A royal court," said Madame de Saint-Remy, forcing a laugh. "A royal court! What do you think of that, my daughter?" And she turned toward Mademoiselle de la Valliere, whom she would by main force have dragged away from Montalais, and who, instead of obeying the impulse of Madame de Saint-Remy, looked first at her mother and then at Montalais with her beautiful conciliatory eyes. "I did not say a royal court, madame, because Madame Henrietta of England, who is about to become the wife of S.A.R. Monsieur, is not a queen. I said almost royal, and I spoke correctly, since she will be the sister-in-law to the king." A thunderbolt falling upon the castle of Blois would not have astonished Madame de Saint-Remy more than the last sentence of Montalais. What do you say of Son Altesse Royale Madame Henrietta? Stammered out the old lady. I say I am going to belong to her household as maid of honor, that is what I say. As maid of honor, cried at the same time Madame de Saint-Remy with despair, and Mademoiselle de la Valliere with delight. Yes, madame, as maid of honor. The old lady's head sank down as if the blow had been too severe for her, but almost immediately recovering herself, she launched a last projectile at her adversary. Oh, oh, said she, I have heard of many of these sorts of promises beforehand, which often lead people to flatter themselves with wild hopes, and at the last moment, when the time comes to keep the promises, and have the hopes realized, they are surprised to see the great credit upon which they reckoned vanish like smoke. Oh, madame, the credit of my protector is incontestable, and his promises are as good as deeds. And would it be indiscreet to ask you the name of this powerful protector? Oh, mon Dieu, no! It is that gentleman there, said Montalais, pointing to Malicorne, who, during this scene, had preserved the most imperturbable coolness, the most comic dignity. Monsieur, cried Madame de Saint-Remy, with an explosion of hilarity, Monsieur is your protector? Is the man whose credit is so powerful, and whose promises are as good as deeds, Monsieur Malicorne? Malicorne bowed. As to Montalais, as to her sole reply, she drew the brevet from her pocket, and showed it to the old lady. Here is the brevet. All at once it was over. As soon as she had cast a rapid glance over this fortunate brevet, the good lady clasped her hands, an unspeakable expression of envy and despair contracted her countenance, and she was obliged to sit down to avoid fainting. Montalais was not malicious enough to rejoice extravagantly at her victory, or to overwhelm the conquered enemy, particularly when that enemy was the mother of her friend. She used then, but did not abuse, her triumph. Malicorne was less generous. He assumed noble pose in his fauteuil, and stretched himself out with a familiarity which, 2 hours earlier, would have drawn upon him threats of a caning. Maid of honor to the young madame, repeated Madame de Saint-Remy, still but half convinced. Yes, madame, and through the protection of Monsieur Malicorne, moreover. It is incredible, repeated the old lady. Is it not incredible, Louise? But Louise did not reply. She was sitting thoughtfully, almost sad. Passing one hand over her beautiful brow, she sighed heavily. Well, but monsieur, said Madame de Saint-Remy all at once, how did you manage to obtain this post? I asked for it, madame. Of whom? One of my friends. And you have friends sufficiently powerful at court to give you such proofs of their credit? It appears so. And may one ask the name of these friends? I did not say I had many friends, madame. I said I had one friend. And that friend is called? Peste, madame, you go too far. When one has a friend as powerful as mine, we do not publish his name in that fashion, in open day, in order that he may be stolen from us. You are right, monsieur, to be silent as to that name, for I think it would be pretty difficult for you to tell it. At all events, said Montalais, if the friend does not exist, the brevet does, and that cuts short the question. Then I conceive, said Madame de Saint-Remy, with the gracious smile of the cat who is going to scratch, when I found monsieur here just now. Well? He brought you the brevet. Exactly, madame, you have guessed rightly. Well, then, nothing can be more moral or proper. I think so, madame. And I have been wrong, as it appears, in reproaching you, mademoiselle. Very wrong, madame, but I am so accustomed to your reproaches that I pardon you these. In that case, let us be gone, Louise. We have nothing to do but retire. Well. Madame, said La Valliere, starting, did you speak? You do not appear to be listening, my child. No, madame, I was thinking. About what? 1,000 things. You bear me no ill will, at least, Louise, cried Montalais, pressing her hand. And why should I, my dear R? Replied the girl in a voice soft as a flute. Dame, resumed Madame de Saint-Remy, if she did bear you a little ill will, poor girl, she could not be much blamed. And why should she bear me ill will, good gracious? It appears to me that she is of as good a family and as pretty as you. Mother! Mother! Cried Louise. Prettier 100 times, madame, not of a better family, but that does not tell me why Louise should bear me ill will. Do you think it will be very amusing for her to be buried alive at Blois when you are going to shine at Paris? But, madame, it is not I who prevent Louise following me thither. On the contrary, I should certainly be most happy if she came there. But it appears that Monsieur Malicorne, who is all powerful at court— Ah, so much the worse, madame, said Malicorne, every one for himself in this poor world. Malicorne, Malicorne, cried Montalais, Then, stooping toward the young man, "Occupy Madame de Saint-Remy, either in disputing with her, or making it up with her. I must speak to Louise." And at the same time a soft pressure of the hand recompensed Malicorne for his future obedience. Malicorne went grumbling toward Madame de Saint-Remy, whilst Montalais said to her friend, throwing one arm around her neck: "What is the matter? Tell me. Is it true that you would not love me if I were to shine, as your mother says?" "Oh, no!" said the young girl, with difficulty restraining her tears. "On the contrary, I rejoice at your good fortune." "Rejoice? Why, one would say you are ready to cry." "Do people never weep except from envy?" "Oh, yes, I understand. I am going to Paris, and in that word Paris recalls to your mind a certain cavalier." "Ah!" "A certain cavalier who formerly lived near Blois, who now resides at Paris. In truth, I know not what ails me, but I feel stifled." "Weep, then, weep, as you cannot give me a smile." Louise raised her sweet face, which the tears, rolling down one after the other, illumined like diamonds. "Come, confess," said Montalais. "What shall I confess?" "What makes you weep? People don't weep without cause. I am your friend; whatever you would wish me to do, I will do. Malicorne is more powerful than you would think. Do you wish to go to Paris?" "Alas!" sighed Louise. "Do you wish to come to Paris?" "To remain here alone in this old castle, I who have enjoyed the delightful habit of listening to your songs, of pressing your hand, of running about the park with you. Oh, how I shall be ennuyée! How quickly I shall die!" "Do you wish to come to Paris?" Louise breathed another sigh. "You do not answer me. What would you that I should reply?" "Yes or no. It is not very difficult, I think." "Oh, you are very fortunate, Montalais." "That is to say, you would like to be in my place." Louise was silent. "Little obstinate thing," said Montalais. "Did ever any one keep her secrets from her friend thus? But confess that you would like to come to Paris; confess that you are dying with the wish to see Raoul again." "I cannot confess that." "Then you are wrong." "In what way?" "Because, do you not see this brevet?" "To be sure I do." "Well, I would have got you a similar one." "By whose means?" "Malicorne's." "Or, are you telling me the truth? Is that possible?" "Malicorne is there, and what he has done for me, he surely can do for you." Malicorne had heard his name pronounced twice. He was delighted at having an opportunity of coming to a conclusion with Madame de Saint Remy, and he turned around. "What is the question, mademoiselle?" "Come hither, Malicorne," said Montalais, with an imperious gesture. Malicorne obeyed. "A brevet like this," said Montalais. "How so?" "A brevet like this, that is plain enough." "But I want one, I must have one." "Oh, oh, you must have one." "Yes." "It is impossible, is it not, Monsieur Malicorne?" said Louise, with her sweet, soft voice. "If it is for you, mademoiselle." "For me, yes, Monsieur Malicorne, it would be for me." "And if Mademoiselle de Montalais asks it at the same time?" "Mademoiselle Montalais does not ask it, she requires it." "Well, we will endeavor to obey you, mademoiselle." "And you will have her named?" "We will try." "No evasive answers. Louise de la Valliere shall be maid of honor to Madame Henrietta within a week." "How you talk!" "Within a week, or else." "Well, or else?" "You may take back your brevet, Monsieur Malicorne. I will not leave my friend." "Dear Montalais!" "That is right. Keep your brevet. Mademoiselle de la Valliere shall be a maid of honor." "Is that true?" "Quite true." "Then I may hope to go to Paris?" "Depend on it." "Oh, Monsieur Malicorne, what joy!" cried Louise, clapping her hands, and bounding with pleasure. "Little dissembler," said Montalais, "try again to make me believe you are not in love with Raoul." Louise blushed like a rose in June, but instead of replying, she ran and embraced her mother. "Madame," said she, "do you know that Monsieur Malicorne is going to have me appointed maid of honor?" "Monsieur Malicorne is a prince in disguise," replied the old lady. "He is all powerful, seemingly." "Should you also like to be a maid of honor?" asked Malicorne of Madame de Saint Remy. "Whilst I am about it, I might as well get everybody appointed." And upon that he went away, leaving the poor lady quite disconcerted. "Humph!" murmured Malicorne, as he descended the stairs. "Humph! There goes another note of 1,000 livres. But I must get through as well as I can. My friend Manicamp does nothing for nothing." End of chapter 3. Recording by Tora. 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 4. Malicorne et Manicamp. The introduction of these two new personages into this history and that mysterious affinity of names and sentiments merit some attention on the part of both historian and reader. We will then enter into some details concerning Messieurs Malicorne et Manicamp. Malicorne, we know, had made the journey to Orleans in search of the brevet destined for Mademoiselle de Montalais, the arrival of which had produced such a strong feeling at the castle of Blois. At that moment, Monsieur de Manicamp was at Orleans. A singular person was this Monsieur de Manicamp, a very intelligent young fellow, always poor, always needy, although he dipped his hand freely into the purse of Monsieur le Comte de Guiche, one of the best furnished purses of the period. Monsieur le Comte de Guiche had, as the companion of his boyhood, this de Manicamp, a poor gentleman, vassal born, of the house of Grimille. Monsieur de Manicamp, with his tact and talent, had created himself a revenue in the opulent family of the celebrated Marechal. From his infancy he had, with calculation beyond his age, lent his mane and complaisance to the follies of the Comte de Guiche. If his noble companion had stolen some fruit destined for Madame la Marechale, or if he had broken a mirror, or put out a dog's eye, Manicamp declared himself guilty of the crime committed, and received the punishment, which was not made the milder for falling on the innocent. But this was the way this system of abnegation was paid for. Instead of wearing such mean habiliments as his paternal fortunes entitled him to, he was able to appear brilliant, superb, like a young noble of 50,000 livres a year. It was not that he was mean in character or humble in spirit. No, he was a philosopher, or rather he had the indifference, the apathy, the obstinacy, which banished from men every sentiment of the supernatural. His sole ambition was to spend money. But in this respect, the worthy Monsieur de Manicamp was a gulf. 3 or 4 times every year he drained the Comte de Guiche, and when the Comte de Guiche was thoroughly drained, when he had turned out his pockets and his purse before him, when he declared that it would be at least a fortnight before paternal munificence would refill those pockets and that purse, Manicamp lost all his energy. He went to bed, remained there, ate nothing, and sold his handsome clothes, under the pretense that, remaining in bed, he did not want them. During this prostration of mind and strength, the purse of the Comte de Guiche was getting full again, and when once filled, overflowed into that of de Manicamp, who bought new clothes, dressed himself again, and recommenced the same life he had followed before. The mania of selling his new clothes for a quarter of what they were worth had rendered our hero sufficiently celebrated in Orleans, a city where, in general, we should be puzzled to say why he came to pass his days of penitence. Provincial debauch, petit maître of 600 livres a year, shared the fragments of his opulence. Among the admirers of these splendid toilettes, our friend Malicorne was conspicuous. He was the son of a syndic of the city, of whom Monsieur de Conde, always needy as a Decan, often borrowed money at enormous interest. Monsieur Malicorne kept the paternal money chest, that is to say, that in those times of easy morals he had made for himself, by following the example of his father and lending at high interest for short terms, a revenue of 1,800 livres, without reckoning 600 livres furnished by the generosity of the syndic, so that Malicorne was the king of the gay youth of Orleans, having 2,400 livres to scatter, squander, and waste on follies of every kind. But quite contrary to Manicamp, Malicorne was terribly ambitious. He loved from ambition. He spent money out of ambition. He would have ruined himself for ambition. Malicorne had determined to rise at whatever price it might cost, and for this, whatever price it did cost, he had given himself a mistress and a friend. The mistress, Mademoiselle de Montalais, was cruel as regarded love, but she was of noble family, and that was sufficient for Malicorne. The friend had little or no friendship, but he was the favorite of the Comte de Guiche, himself the friend of Monsieur, the king's brother, and that was sufficient for Malicorne. Only, in the chapter of charges, Mademoiselle de Montalais cost per annum, ribbons, gloves, and sweets, 1,000 livres. De Manicamp cost, money lent, never returned, from 12 to 1,500 livres per annum, so that there was nothing left for Malicorne. Ah, yes, we are mistaken. There was left the paternal strong-box. He employed a mode of proceeding which he preserved with the most profound secrecy, and which consisted in advancing to himself, from the coffers of the syndic, half a dozen years' profits, that is to say, 15,000 livres, swearing to himself, observe quite to himself, to repay this deficiency as soon as an opportunity should present itself. The opportunity was expected to be the concession of a good post in the household of Monsieur, when that household would be established in the period of his marriage. This juncture had arrived, and the household was about to be established. A good post in the family of a prince of the blood, when it is given by the credit and on the recommendation of a friend, like Comte de Guiche, is worth at least 12,000 livres per annum. And by the means which Monsieur Malicorne had taken to make his revenues fructify, 12,000 livres might rise to 20,000. Then, once an incumbent of this post, he would marry Mademoiselle de Montalais. Mademoiselle de Montalais, of a half-noble family, not only would be dowered, but would ennoble Malicorne. But in order that Mademoiselle de Montalais, who had not a large patrimonial fortune, although an only daughter, should be suitably dowered, it was necessary that she should belong to some great princess, as prodigal as the dowager Madame was covetous. And in order that the wife should not be of one party, while the husband belonged to another, the situation which presents serious inconveniences, particularly with characters like those of the future consorts, Malicorne had imagined the idea of making the central point of the union the household of Monsieur, the king's brother. Mademoiselle de Montalais would be maid of honor to Madame, Monsieur Malicorne would be officer to Monsieur. It is plain the plan was formed by a clear head. It is plain also that it had been bravely executed. Malicorne had asked Manicamp to ask a brevet of maid of honor of the Comte de Guiche, and the Comte de Guiche had asked this brevet of Monsieur, who had signed it without hesitation. The constructive plan of Malicorne, for we may well suppose that the combination of mind as active as his were not confined to the present, but extended to the future. The constructive plan of Malicorne, we say, was this: to obtain entrance into the household of Madame Henrietta for a woman devoted to himself, who was intelligent, young, handsome, and intriguing; to learn, by means of this woman, all the feminine secrets of the young household, whilst he, Malicorne, and his friend Manicamp, should, between them, know all the male secrets of the young community. It was by these means that a rapid and splendid fortune might be acquired at one and the same time. Malicorne was a vile name. He who bore it had too much wit to conceal this truth from himself. But an estate might be purchased, and Malicorne of some place, or even de Malicorne itself, for short, would ring more nobly on the ear. It is not improbable that a most aristocratic origin might be hunted up by the heralds for this name of Malicorne. Might it not come from some estate where a bull with mortal horns had caused some great misfortune and baptized the soil with the blood it had spilt? Certes, this plan presented itself bristling with difficulties. But the greatest of all was Mademoiselle de Montalais herself. Capricious, variable, close, giddy, free, prudish, a virgin armed with claws, Aragon stained with grapes, she sometimes overturned, with a single dash of her white fingers, or with a single puff from her laughing lips, the edifice which had exhausted Malicorne's patience for a month. Love apart, Malicorne was happy, but this love, which he could not help feeling, he had the strength to conceal with care, persuaded that the least relaxing of the ties by which he had bound his Protean female, the demon would overthrow and laugh at him. He humbled his mistress by disdaining her. Burning with desire, when she advanced to tempt him, he had the art to appear ice, persuaded that if he opened his arms, she would run away laughing at him. On her side, Montalais believed she did not love Malicorne, whilst, on the contrary, in reality she did. Malicorne repeated to her so often his protestation of indifference that she finished sometimes by believing him, and then she believed she detested Malicorne. If she tried to bring him back by coquetry, Malicorne played the coquette better than she could. But what made Montalais hold to Malicorne in an indissoluble fashion was that Malicorne always came crammed full of fresh news from the court and the city. Malicorne always brought to Blois a fashion, a secret, or a perfume that Malicorne never asked for a meeting, but, on the contrary, required to be supplicated to receive the favors he burned to obtain. On her side, Montalais was no miser with stories. By her means, Malicorne learnt all that passed at Blois in the family of the dowager Madame, and he related to Manicamp tales that made him ready to die with laughing, which the latter, out of idleness, took ready-made to Monsieur de Guiche, who carried them to Monsieur. Such, in 2 words, was the woof of the petty interests and the petty conspiracies which united Blois with Orleans, and Orleans with Paris, and which was about to bring into the last named city where she was to produce so great a revolution, the poor little La Valliere, who was far from suspecting, as she returned joyfully, leaning on the arm of her mother, for what a strange future she was reserved. As to the good man Malicorne, we speak of the Saint-Die of Orleans. He did not see more clearly into the present than others did into the future, and had no suspicion as he walked every day, between 3 and 5 o'clock after his dinner, upon the Place Saint Catherine, in his grey coat, cut after the fashion of Louis XIII, and his cloth shoes with great knots of ribbon, that it was he who was paying for all these bursts of laughter, all those stolen kisses, all those whisperings, all those little keepsakes, and all those bubble projects which formed a chain of 45 leagues in length, from the Palais of Blois to the Palais Royal. End of chapter 4. Recording by Torah. "10 years later." This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 5. Manicamp et Malicorne. Malicorne then left Blois, as we have said, and went to find his friend Manicamp, then in temporary retreat in the city of Orleans. It was just at the moment when that young nobleman was employed in selling the last decent clothing he had left. He had, a fortnight before, extorted from the Comte de Guiche 100 pistoles, all he had, to assist in equipping him properly to go and meet Madame on her arrival at Le Havre. He had drawn from Malicorne 3 days before 50 pistoles, the price of the brevet obtained for Montalais. He had then no expectation of anything else, having exhausted all his resources, with the exception of selling a handsome suit of cloth and satin, embroidered and laced with gold, which had been the admiration of the court. But to be able to sell this suit, the last he had left, as we have been forced to confess to the reader, Manicamp had been obliged to take to his bed. No more fire, no more pocket money, no more walking money, nothing but sleep to take the place of repasts, companies, and balls. It has been said, he who sleeps dines, but it has never been affirmed, he who sleeps plays, or he who sleeps dances. Manicamp, reduced to this extremity of neither playing nor dancing, for a week at least, was consequently very sad. He was expecting a usurer, and saw Malicorne enter. A cry of distress escaped him. "Eh, what?" said he, in a tone which nothing can describe. "Is that you again, dear friend?" "Humph! You are very polite," said Malicorne. "Ay, but look at you. I was expecting money, and instead of money I see you." "And suppose I brought you some money?" "Oh, that would be quite another thing. You are very welcome, my dear friend." And he held out his hand, not for the hand of Malicorne, but for the purse. Malicorne pretended to be mistaken, and gave him his hand. "And the money?" said Manicamp. "My dear friend, if you wish to have it, earn it." "What must be done for it?" "Earn it, parbleu! And after what fashion?" "Oh, that is rather trying, I warn you." "The devil! You must get out of bed, and go immediately to Monsieur le Comte de Guiche." "I get up," said Manicamp, stretching himself in his bed complacently. "Oh, no, thank you." "You have sold all your clothes?" "No, I have one suit left, the handsomest even, but I expect a purchaser." "And the chausses?" "Well, if you look, you will see them on that chair." "Very well, since you have some chausses and a pourpoint left, put your legs into the first, and your back into the other, have a horse saddled, and set off." "Not I." "And why not?" "Morbleu, don't you know then that Monsieur de Guiche is at Etampes?" "No, I thought he was at Paris. You will then only have 15 leagues to go instead of 30. "You are a wonderfully clever fellow. If I were to ride 15 leagues in these clothes, they would never be fit to put on again, and instead of selling them for 30 pistoles, I should be obliged to take 15. "Sell them for whatever you like, but I must have a second commission of maid of honor." "Good! For whom? Is Montalais doubled, then?" "Vile fellow, it is you who are doubled. You swallow up 2 fortunes, mine and that of Monsieur le Comte de Guiche." "You should say, that of Monsieur le Comte de Guiche and yours." "That is true, honor where it is due, but I return to my brevet." "And you are wrong." "Prove me that." My friend, there will only be 12 maids of honor for Madame. I have already obtained for you what 1,200 women are trying for, and for that I was forced to employ all my diplomacy. Oh, yes, I know you have been quite heroic, my dear friend. We know what we are about, said Manicamp. To whom do you tell that? When I am king, I promise you one thing. What, to call yourself Malicorne the First? No, to make you superintendent of my finances, but that is not the question now. Unfortunately. The present affair is to procure for me a second place of maid of honor. My friend, if you were to promise me the price of heaven, I would decline to disturb myself at this moment. Malicorne chinked the money in his pocket. There are 20 pistoles here, said Malicorne. And what would you do with 20 pistoles, mon Dieu? Well, said Malicorne, a little angry, suppose I were to add them to the 500 you already owe me. You are right, replied Manicamp, stretching out his hand again, and from that point of view I can accept them. Give them to me. An instant, what the devil? It is not only holding out your hand that will do. If I give you the 20 pistoles, shall I have my brevet? To be sure you shall. Soon? Today. Oh, take care, Monsieur de Manicamp, you undertake much, and I do not ask that. 30 leagues in a day is too much, you would kill yourself. I think nothing impossible when obliging a friend. You are quite heroic. Where are the 20 pistoles? Here they are, said Malicorne, showing them. That's well. Yes, my dear Monsieur Manicamp, you would consume them in post horses alone. No, no, make yourself easy on that score. Pardon me. Why, it is 15 leagues from this place to Etampes? 14. Well, 14 be it. 14 leagues makes 7 posts. At 20 sous the post, 7 livres. 7 livres the courier, 14, and as many as coming back, 28. As much for bread and supper. That makes 60 livres this complaisance would cost. Manicamp stretched himself like a serpent in bed, and fixing his 2 great eyes upon Malicorne, you are right, said he. I should not return before tomorrow, and he took the 20 pistoles. Now then, be off. Well, as I cannot be back before tomorrow, we have time. Time for what? Time to play. What do you wish to play with? Your 20 pistoles, pardieu. No, you always win. I will wager them then. Against what? Against 20 others. And what shall be the object of the wager? This. We have said it was 14 leagues to Etampes. Yes. And 14 leagues back. Doubtless. Well, for these 28 leagues you cannot allow less than 14 hours. That is agreed. 1 hour to find the Comte de Guiche. Go on. And an hour to persuade him to write a letter to Monsieur. Just so. 16 hours in all. You reckon as well as Monsieur Colbert. It is now 12 o'clock. Half past. Hey, you have a handsome watch. What were you saying? Said Malicorne, putting his watch quickly back into his fob. Ah, true. I was offering to lay you 20 pistoles against these you have lent me, that you will have the Comte de Guiche's letter in... How soon? In 8 hours. Have you a winged horse, then? That is no matter. Will you bet? I shall have the Comte's letter in 8 hours? Yes. In hand? In hand. Well, be it so, I lay, said Malicorne, curious enough to know how this seller of clothes would get through. Is it agreed? It is. Pass me the pen, ink, and paper. Here they are. Thank you. Manicamp raised himself with a sigh, and leaning on his left elbow in his best hand, traced the following lines. Good for an order of place of maid of honor to Madame, which Monsieur le Comte de Guiche will take upon him to obtain its sight. De Manicamp. This painful task accomplished, he laid himself down in bed again. Well, asked Malicorne, what does this mean? That means that if you are in a hurry to have the letter from the Comte de Guiche for Monsieur, I have won my wager. How the devil is that? That is transparent enough, I think. You take the paper. Well, and you set out instead of me. Ah, you put your horses to their best speed. Good. In 6 hours you will be at Etampes. In 7 hours you will have the letter from the Comte, and I shall have won my wager without stirring from my bed, which suits me and you too at the same time, I am very sure. Decidedly, Manicamp, you are a great man. I know that. I am to start then for Etampes? Directly. I am to go to the Comte de Guiche with this order. He will give you a similar one from Monsieur. Monsieur will approve? Instantly. And I shall have my brevet. You will. Ah! Well, I hope I behaved genteelly. Adorably. Thank you. You do as you please, then, with the Comte de Guiche, Manicamp, except making money of him, everything. Diable! The exception is annoying, but then if instead of asking him for money, you were to ask, what? Something important. What do you call important? Well, suppose one of your friends asked you to render him a service. I would not render it to him. Selfish fellow. Or at least I would ask him what service he would render me in exchange. Ah, that, perhaps, is fair. Well, that friend speaks to you. What, you, Malicorne? Yes, I. Ha, ha! You are rich, then. I still have 50 pistoles left. Exactly the sum I want. Where are those 50 pistoles? Here, said Malicorne, slapping his pocket. Then speak, my friend. What do you want? Malicorne took up the pen, ink, and paper again, and presented them all to Manicamp. Right, said he. Dictate. An order for a place in the household of Monsieur. Oh, said Manicamp, laying down the pen, a place in the household of Monsieur for 50 pistoles? You mistook me, my friend. You did not hear plainly. What did you say, then? I said 500. And the 500? Here they are. Manicamp devoured the rouleau with his eyes, but this time Malicorne held it at a distance. Eh, what do you say to that? 500 pistoles. I say it is for nothing, my friend, said Manicamp, taking up the pen again, and you exhaust my credit. Dictate. Malicorne continued, which my friend the Comte de Guiche will obtain for my friend Malicorne. That's it, said Manicamp. Pardon me, you have forgotten to sign. Ah, that is true. The 500 pistoles? Here are 250 of them. And the other 250? When I am in possession of my place. Manicamp made a face. In that case, give me the recommendation back again. What to do? To add 2 words to it. 2 words? Yes, 2 words only. What are they? In haste. Malicorne returned the recommendation. Manicamp added the words. Good, said Malicorne, taking back the paper. Manicamp began to count out the pistoles. There want 20, said he. How so? The 20 I have won. In what way? By laying that you would have the letter from the Comte de Guiche in 8 hours. Ah, that's fair, and he gave him the 20 pistoles. Manicamp began to scoop up the gold by the handfuls, and pour it in cascades upon his bed. This second place, murmured Malicorne, whilst drying his paper, which at first glance appears to cost me more than the first, but... He stopped, and took up the pen in his turn, and wrote to Montalais. Mademoiselle, announce to your friend that her commission will not be long before it arrives. I am setting out to get it signed. That will be 28 leagues I shall have gone for the love of you. Then, with his sardonic smile, taking up the interrupted sentence, this place, said he, at first glance appears to have cost more than the first, but the benefit will be, I hope, in proportion with the expense, and Mademoiselle de la Valliere will bring me back more than Mademoiselle de Montalais, or else, my name is not Malicorne. Farewell, Manicamp, and he left the room. End of chapter 5. Recording by Tora. 6 of 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 Years Later by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 6. The Courtyard of the Hotel Grimille. On Malicorne's arrival at Orleans, he was informed that the Comte de Guiche had just set out for Paris. Malicorne rested himself for a couple of hours, and then prepared to continue his journey. He reached Paris during the night, and alighted at a small hotel, where, in his previous journeys to the capital, he had been accustomed to put up, and at 8 o'clock the next morning presented himself at the Hotel Grimille. Malicorne arrived just in time, for the Comte de Guiche was on the point of taking leave of Monsieur before setting out for Le Havre, where the principal members of the French nobility had gone to await Madame's arrival from England. Malicorne pronounced the name of Manicamp, and was immediately admitted. He found the Comte de Guiche in the courtyard of the Hotel Grimille, inspecting his horses, which his trainers and equerries were passing in review before him. The Count, in the presence of his tradespeople and his servants, was engaged in praising or blaming, as the case seemed to deserve, the appointments, horses, and harness that were being submitted to him, when, in the midst of this important occupation, The name of Manicamp was announced. "Manicamp!" he exclaimed. "Let him enter by all means." And he advanced a few steps toward the door. Malicorne slipped through the half-open door, and looking at the Comte de Guiche, who was surprised to see a face he did not recognize instead of the one he expected, said, "Forgive me, Monsieur le Comte, but I believe a mistake has been made. Monsieur Manicamp himself was announced to you, instead of which it is only an envoy from him." "Ah!" exclaimed De Guiche coldly, "and what do you bring me?" "A letter, Monsieur le Comte." Malicorne handed him the first document, and narrowly watched the count's face, who, as he read it, began to laugh. "What!" he exclaimed, "another maid of honor? Are all the maids of honor in France, then, under his protection?" Malicorne bowed. "Why does he not come himself?" he inquired. "He is confined to his bed." "The deuce! He has no money, then, I suppose," said De Guiche, shrugging his shoulders. "What does he do with his money?" Malicorne made a movement to indicate that upon this subject he was as ignorant as the count himself. "Why does he not make use of his credit, then?" continued De Guiche. "With regard to that, I think—" "What?" "That Manicamp has credit with no one but yourself, Monsieur le Comte." "You will not be at Le Havre, then?" Whereupon Malicorne made another movement. "But every one will be there." "I trust, Monsieur le Comte, that he will not neglect so excellent an opportunity." "He should be at Paris by this time." "He will take the direct road, perhaps, to make up for lost times." "Where is he now?" "At Orleans." "Monsieur," said De Guiche, "you seem to me a man of very good taste." Malicorne was wearing some of Manicamp's old new clothes. He bowed in return, saying, "You do me a very great honor, Monsieur le Comte." "Whom have I the pleasure of addressing?" "My name is Malicorne, monsieur." "Monsieur de Malicorne, what do you think of these pistol holsters?" Malicorne was a man of great readiness, and immediately understood the position of affairs. Besides, the de which had been prefixed to his name raised him to the rank of the person with whom he was conversing. He looked at the holsters with an air of a connoisseur, and said without hesitation, "Somewhat heavy, monsieur." "You see," said De Guiche to the saddler, "this gentleman, who understands these matters well, thinks the holsters heavy too, a complaint I had already made." The saddler was full of excuses. "What do you think," asked De Guiche, "of this horse which I have just purchased?" "To look at it, it seems perfect, Monsieur le Comte, but I must mount it before I give my opinion." "Do so, Monsieur de Malicorne, and ride him around the court 2 or 3 times." The courtyard of the hotel was so arranged that whenever there was an occasion for it, it could be used as a riding school. Malicorne, with perfect ease, arranged the bridle and snaffle reins, placed his left hand on the horse's mane, and, with his left foot in the stirrup, raised himself and seated himself in the saddle. At first he made the horse walk the whole circuit of the courtyard at foot pace, next at a trot, lastly at a gallop. He then drew up close to the count, dismounted, and threw the bridle to a groom standing by. "Well," said the count, "what do you think of it, Monsieur de Malicorne?" "This horse, Monsieur le Comte, is of the Mecklenburg breed. In looking whether the bit suited his mouth, I saw that he was rising 7, the very age when the training of a horse intended for a charger should commence. The forehand is light. A horse which holds its head high, it is said, never tires his rider's hand. The withers are rather low. The drooping of the hindquarters would almost make me doubt the purity of its German breed, and I think there is English blood in him. He stands well on his legs, but he trots high, and may cut himself, which requires attention to be paid to his shoeing. He is tractable, and as I made him turn around and change his feet, I found him quick and ready in doing so." "Well said, Monsieur de Malicorne," exclaimed the comte. "You are a judge of horses, I perceive." Then, turning toward him again, he continued, "You are most becomingly dressed, Monsieur de Malicorne. That is not a provincial cut, I presume. Such a style of dress is not to be met with at Tours or Orleans." "No, Monsieur le Comte, my clothes were made at Paris." "There is no doubt about that. But let us resume our own affair. Manicamp wishes for the appointment of a second maid of honor." "You perceive what he has written, Monsieur le Comte." "For whom was the first appointment?" Malicorne felt the color rise in his face, and he answered hurriedly, "A charming maid of honor, Mademoiselle de Montalais." "Ah, you are acquainted with her?" "We are affianced, or nearly so." "That is quite another thing, then. 1,000 compliments," exclaimed De Guiche, upon whose lips a courtier's jest was already fitting, but to whom the word affiance, addressed by Malicorne with respect to Mademoiselle de Montalais, recalled the respect due to women. "And for whom is the second appointment destined?" asked De Guiche. "Is it for any one to whom Manicamp may happen to be affianced? In that case I pity her, poor girl, for she will have a sad fellow for a husband." "No, Monsieur le Comte, the second appointment is for Mademoiselle de la Baume le Blanc de la Valliere." "Unknown," said Guiche. "Unknown? Yes, monsieur," said Malicorne, smiling in his turn. "Very good. I will speak to monsieur about it. By the by, she is of gentle birth?" "She belongs to a very good family, and is maid of honor to Madame." "That's well. Will you accompany me to monsieur?" "Most certainly, if I may be permitted that honor." "Have you your carriage?" "No, I came here on horseback." "Dressed as you are?" "No, monsieur, I posted from Orleans, and I changed my traveling suit for the one I have on, in order to present myself to you." "True, you already told me you had come from Orleans," saying which he crumpled Manicamp's letter in his hand, and thrust it in his pocket. "I beg your pardon," said Malicorne timidly, "but I do not think you have read all." "Not read all, do you say?" "No, there were two letters in the same envelope." "Oh, are you sure?" "Quite sure." "Let us look, then," said the count, as he opened the letter again. "Ah, you are right," he said, opening the paper which he had not yet read. "I suspected it," he continued, "another application for an appointment under monsieur. This Manicamp is a regular vampire. He is carrying on a trade in it." "No, monsieur le comte, he wishes to make a present of it." "To whom?" "To myself, monsieur." "Why did you not say so at once, my dear Monsieur Mauvais-Corne?" "Malicorne, monsieur le comte." "Forgive me, it is that Latin that bothers me, that terrible mine of etymologies. Why the deuce are young men of family taught Latin? Mala and mauvaise, you understand it is the same thing. You will forgive me, I trust, Monsieur de Malicorne." "Your kindness affects me much, monsieur, but it is a reason why I should make you acquainted with one circumstance without any delay." "What is it?" "That I was not born a gentleman. I am not without courage, and not altogether deficient in ability, but my name is Malicorne simply." "You appear to me, monsieur," exclaimed the count, looking at the astute face of his companion, "to be a most agreeable man. Your face pleases me, Monsieur Malicorne, and you must possess some indisputably excellent qualities to have pleased that egotistical Manicamp. Be candid, and tell me whether you are not some saint descended upon the earth." "Why so?" "For the simple reason that he makes you a present of anything. Did you not say that he intended to make you a present of some appointment in the king's household?" "I beg your pardon, count, but if I succeed in obtaining the appointment, you, and not he, will have bestowed it on me." "Besides, he will not have given it to you for nothing, I suppose. Stay, I have it. There is a Malicorne at Orleans who lends money to the prince." "I think that must be my father, monsieur." "Ah! the prince has the father, and that terrible dragon of a Manicamp has the son. Take care, monsieur, I know him. He will fleece you completely." "The only difference is, that I lend without interest," said Malicorne, smiling. "I was correct in saying you were either a saint or very much resembled one, Monsieur Malicorne. You shall have the post you want, or I will forfeit my name." "Ah, monsieur le comte, what a debt of gratitude shall I not owe you?" said Malicorne, transported. "Let us go to the prince, my dear Monsieur Malicorne," and De Guiche proceeded toward the door, desiring Malicorne to follow him. At the very moment they were about to cross the threshold, a young man appeared on the other side. He was from 24 to 25 years of age, of pale complexion, bright eyes, and brown hair and eyebrows. "Good day," said he suddenly, almost pushing De Guiche back into the courtyard again. "Is that you, De Wardes? And what, booted, spurred, and whip in hand too?" "The most befitting costume for a man about to set off for Le Havre. There will be no one left in Paris to morrow." And hereupon he saluted Malicorne with great ceremony, whose handsome dress gave him the appearance of a prince. "Monsieur Malicorne," said De Guiche to his friend. De Wardes bowed. "Monsieur De Wardes," said Guiche to Malicorne, who bowed in return. "By the way, De Wardes," continued De Guiche, "you who are so well acquainted with these matters, can you tell us, probably, what appointments are still vacant at the court, or rather in the prince's household?" "In the prince's household," said De Wardes, looking up with an air of consideration. "Let me see. The appointment of the master of the horse is vacant, I believe." "Oh!" said Malicorne, "there is no question of such a post as that, monsieur. My ambition is not nearly so exhausted." De Wardes had more penetrating observation than De Guiche, and fathomed Malicorne immediately. "The fact is," said he, looking at him from head to foot, "a man must be either a duke or a peer to fill that post." "All I solicit," said Malicorne, "is a very humble appointment. I am of little importance, and do not rank myself above my position." "Monsieur Malicorne, whom you see here," said De Guiche to De Wardes, "is a very excellent fellow, whose only misfortune is that of not being gentle birth. As far as I am concerned, you know, I attach little value to those who have but gentle birth to boast of." "Assuredly," said De Wardes, "but will you allow me to remark, my dear count, that without rank of some sort, one can hardly hope to belong to his Royal Highness's household." "You are right," said the count. "Court etiquette is absolute. The devil! We never so much as gave it a thought." "Alas! a sad misfortune for me, Monsieur le Comte," said Malicorne, changing color. "Yet not without a remedy, I hope," returned De Guiche. "The remedy is found easily enough," exclaimed De Wardes. "You can be created a gentleman. His Eminence, the Cardinal Mazarin, did nothing else from morning till night." "Hush, hush, De Wardes," said the count. "No jests of that kind. It ill becomes us to turn such matters into ridicule. Letters of nobility, it is true, are purchasable, but that is a sufficient misfortune without the nobles themselves laughing at it." "Upon my word, De Guiche, you're quite a Puritan, as the English say." At this moment the Vicomte de Bragelonne was announced by one of the servants in the courtyard, in precisely the same manner as he would have done in a room. "Come here, my dear Raoul. What, you too, booted and spurred? You are setting off, then?" Bragelonne approached the group of young men, and saluted them with that quiet and serious manner peculiar to him. His salutation was principally addressed to De Wardes, with whom he was unacquainted, and whose features, on his perceiving Raoul, had assumed a strange sternness of expression. "I have come, De Guiche," he said, "to ask your companionship. We set off for Le Havre, I presume." "That is admirable, delightful. We shall have a most enjoyable journey. Monsieur Malicorne, Monsieur Bragelonne. Ah, Monsieur De Wardes, let me present you." The young men saluted each other in a restrained manner. Their very natures seemed, from the beginning, disposed to take exception to one another. De Wardes was pliant, subtle, full of dissimulation. Raoul was calm, grave, and upright. "Decide between us, between De Wardes and myself, Raoul." "Upon what subject?" "Upon the subject of noble birth. Who can be better informed of that subject than a de Gramont?" "No compliments, it is your opinion I ask." "At least inform me of the subject under discussion." De Wardes asserts that the distribution of titles is abused. I, on the contrary, maintain that a title is useless to the man on whom it is bestowed. "And you are correct," said Bragelonne, quietly. "But, Monsieur le Vicomte," interrupted De Wardes, with a kind of obstinacy, "I affirm that it is I who am correct." "What was your opinion, monsieur?" "I was saying that everything is done in France at the present moment to humiliate men of family." "And by whom?" "By the king himself. He surrounds himself with people who cannot show 4 quarterings." "Nonsense," said De Guiche. "Where could you possibly have seen that, De Wardes?" "One example will suffice," he returned, directing his look fully upon Raoul. "State it, then." "Do you know who has just been nominated captain general of the Musketeers? An appointment much more valuable than a peerage, for it gives precedence over all the marechals of France." Raoul's color mounted in his face, for he saw the object De Wardes had in review. "No, who has been appointed? In any case, it must have been very recently, for the appointment was vacant 8 days ago, a proof of which is, the king refused Monsieur, who solicited the post for one of his protege." "Well, the king refused it to Monsieur's protege, in order to bestow it upon the Chevalier d'Artagnan, a younger brother of some Gascon family, who has been trailing his sword in the antechambers during the last 30 years. "Forgive me if I interrupt you," said Raoul, darting a glance full of severity at De Wardes, "but you give me the impression of being unacquainted with the gentleman of whom you are speaking." "I am not acquainted with Monsieur d'Artagnan. Can you tell me, monsieur, who does not know him?" "Those who do know him, monsieur," replied Raoul, with still greater calmness and sternness of manner, "are in the habit of saying, that if he is not as good a gentleman as the king, which is not his fault, he is the equal of all the kings of the earth in courage and loyalty. Such is my opinion, monsieur, and I thank Heaven I have known Monsieur d'Artagnan from my birth." De Wardes was about to reply, when De Guiche interrupted him. End of chapter 6. Recording by Torah. 10 years later. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. 10 years later, by Alexandre Dumas. Chapter 7. The Portrait of Madame. The discussion was becoming full of bitterness. De Guiche perfectly understood the whole matter, for there was in Bragelonne's face a look instinctively hostile, while in that of De Wardes there was something like a determination to offend. Without inquiring into the different feelings which actuated his two friends, De Guiche resolved to ward off the blow which he felt was on the point of being dealt by one of them, and perhaps both. Gentlemen, he said, we must take our leave of each other. I must pay a visit to Monsieur. You, De Wardes, will accompany me to the Louvre, and you, Raoul, will remain here as master of the house, and as all that is done here is under your advice, you will bestow the last glance upon my preparations for departure. Raoul, with the air of one who neither seeks nor fears a quarrel, bowed his head in token of assent, and seated himself upon a bench in the sun. That is well, said De Guiche. Remain where you are, Raoul, and tell them to show you the 2 horses I have just purchased. You will give me your opinion, for I only bought them on condition that you ratified the purchase. By the by, I have to beg your pardon for having omitted to inquire after the Comte de la Fere. While pronouncing these latter words, he closely observed De Wardes, in order to perceive what effect the name of Raoul's father would produce upon him. I thank you, answered the young man. The count is well. A gleam of deep hatred passed into De Wardes' eyes. De Guiche, who appeared not to notice the foreboding expression, went up to Raoul, grasping him by the hand, said, "It is agreed, then, Bragelonne, is it not, that you will rejoin us in the courtyard of the Palais Royal?" He then signed to De Wardes to follow him, who had been engaged in balancing himself first on one foot, then on the other. "We are going," he said. "Come, Monsieur Malicorne." This name made Raoul start, for it seemed that he had already heard it pronounced before, but he could not remember on what occasion. While trying to recall it half dreamily, yet half irritated at his conversation with De Wardes, the 3 young men set out on their way toward the Palais Royal, where Monsieur was residing. Malicorne learned 2 things: the first, that the young men had something to say to each other, and the second, that he ought not walk in the same line with them, and therefore he walked behind. "Are you mad?" said De Guiche to his companion, as soon as they had left the Hôtel Grimille. "You attacked Monsieur d'Artagnan, and that too before Raoul." "Well," said De Wardes, "what then?" "What do you mean, what then?" "Certainly, is there any prohibition against attacking Monsieur d'Artagnan?" "But you know very well that Monsieur d'Artagnan was one of those celebrated and terrible 4 men who were called the Musketeers." "That they may be, but I do not perceive why, on that account, I should be forbidden to hate Monsieur d'Artagnan." "What cause has he given you?" "Me, personally, none." "Why hate him, therefore?" "Ask my dead father that question." "Really, my dear De Wardes, you surprise me. Monsieur d'Artagnan is not one to leave unsettled any enmity he may have to arrange, without completely clearing his account. Your father, I have heard, carried matters with a high hand. Moreover, there are no enmities so bitter that they cannot be washed away by blood, by a good sword thrust loyally given. Listen to me, my dear De Guiche. This inveterate dislike existed between my father and Monsieur d'Artagnan, and when I was quite a child he acquainted me with the reason for it, and, as forming part of my inheritance, I regard it as a particular legacy bestowed upon me." "And does this hatred concern Monsieur d'Artagnan alone?" "As for that, Monsieur d'Artagnan was so intimately associated with his 3 friends, that some portion of the full measure of my hatred falls to their lot, and that hatred is of such a nature, whenever the opportunity occurs, they shall have no occasion to complain of their allowance." De Guiche had kept his eyes fixed on De Wardes, and shuddered at the bitter manner in which the young man smiled. Something like a presentiment flashed across his mind. He knew that the time had passed away for grand coups entre gentilshommes, but that the feeling of hatred treasured up in the mind, instead of being diffused abroad, was still hatred all the same. That to the fathers who hated with their hearts and fought with their arms, would now succeed the sons, who would indeed hate with their hearts, but would no longer combat their enemies save by means of intrigue or treachery. As, therefore, it certainly was not Raoul whom he could suspect either of intrigue or treachery, it was on Raoul's account that De Guiche trembled. However, while the gloomy forebodings passed in shade of anxiety over De Guiche's countenance, De Wardes had resumed the entire mastery over himself. "At all events," he observed, "I have no personal ill will toward Monsieur de Bragelonne. I do not know him even." "In any case," said De Guiche, with a certain amount of severity in his tone of voice, "do not forget one circumstance, that Raoul is my most intimate friend." A remark at which De Wardes bowed. The conversation terminated there, although De Guiche tried his utmost to draw out his secret from him, but doubtless De Wardes had determined to say nothing further, and he remained impenetrable. De Guiche therefore promised himself a more satisfactory result with Raoul. In the meantime, they had reached the Palais Royal, which was surrounded by a crowd of lookers-on. The household belonging to Monsieur awaited his command to mount their horses, in order to form part of the escort of the ambassadors to whom it had been entrusted to care the bringing of the young princess to Paris. The brilliant display of horses, arms, and rich liveries afforded some compensation in those times, thanks to the kindly feelings of the people, and to the traditions of deep devotion to their sovereigns, for the enormous expenses charged upon the taxes. Mazarin has said, "Let them sing, provided they pay," while Louis XIV's remark was, "Let them look." Sight had replaced the voice, the people could still look, but they were no longer allowed to sing. De Guiche left De Wardes and Malicorne at the bottom of the grand staircase, while he himself, who shared the favor and good graces of Monsieur with the Chevalier de Lorraine, always smiled at him most affectionately, though he could not endure him, went straight to the prince's apartments, whom he found engaged in admiring himself in the glass, and rouging his face. In a corner of the cabinet, the Chevalier de Lorraine was extended full length upon some cushions, having just had his long hair curled, which he was playing with in the same manner a woman would have done. The prince turned round as the count entered, and perceiving who it was, said, "Ah, is that you, De Guiche? Come here and tell me the truth." "You know, my lord, it is one of my defects to speak the truth." "You will hardly believe, De Guiche, how that wicked chevalier has annoyed me." The chevalier shrugged his shoulders. "Why, he pretends," continued the prince, "that Mademoiselle Henrietta is better looking as a woman than I am as a man." "Do not forget, my lord," said De Guiche, frowning slightly, "you require me to speak the truth." "Certainly," said the prince, trembling. "Well, and I shall tell it to you." "Do not be in such a hurry, Guiche," exclaimed the prince. "You have plenty of time. Look at me attentively, and try to recollect Madame. Besides, her portrait is here. Look at it." And he held out to him a miniature of the finest possible execution. De Guiche took it, and looked at it for a long time attentively. "Upon my word, my lord, this is indeed a most lovely face." "But look at me, count, look at me," said the prince, endeavoring to direct upon himself the attention of the count, who was completely absorbed in contemplation of the portrait. "It is wonderful," murmured Guiche. "Really, one would imagine you had never seen the young lady before." "It is true, my lord, I have seen her, but it was 5 years ago. There is a great difference between a child 12 years old and a girl of 17. "Well, what is your opinion?" "My opinion is that the portrait must be flattering, my lord." "Of that," said the prince triumphantly, "there can be no doubt. But let us suppose that it is not. What would your opinion be?" "My lord, that your highness is exceedingly happy to have so charming a bride." The Chevalier de Lorraine burst out laughing. The prince understood how severe toward himself this opinion of the Comte de Guiche was, and he looked somewhat displeased, saying, "My friends are not overindulgent." De Guiche looked at the portrait again, and after lengthened contemplation, returned it with apparent unwillingness, saying, "Most decidedly, my lord, I should rather prefer to look 10 times at your highness than to look at Madame once again." It seemed as if the chevalier had detected some mystery in these words, which were incomprehensible to the prince, for he exclaimed, "Very well, get married yourself." Monsieur continued painting himself, and when he had finished, looked at the portrait again once more, turned to admire himself in the glass, and smiled, no doubt satisfied with his comparison. "You are very kind to have come," he said to De Guiche. "I feared you would leave without bidding me adieu." "Your highness knows me too well to believe me capable of so great disrespect. Besides, I suppose you have something to ask from me before leaving Paris." "Your highness has indeed guessed correctly, for I have a request to make." "Very good, what is it?" The Chevalier de Lorraine immediately displayed the greatest attention, for he regarded every favor conferred upon another as a robbery committed against himself. And, as Guiche hesitated, the prince said, "If it be money, nothing could be more fortunate, for I am in funds. The superintendent of the finances has sent me 500,000 pistoles." "I thank your highness, but it is not an affair of money." "What is it, then? Tell me." "The appointment of a maid of honor." Oh, Guiche, what a protector you have become of the young ladies," said the prince. "You never speak of any one else now." The Chevalier de Lorraine smiled, for he knew very well that nothing displeased the prince more than to show any interest in ladies. "My lord," said the comte, "it is not I who am directly interested in the lady of whom I have just spoken. I am acting on behalf of one of my friends." "Ah, that is different. What is the name of the young lady in whom your friend is so interested?" "Mademoiselle de la Baume le Blanc de la Valliere. She is already maid of honor to the dowager princess." "Why, she is lame," said the Chevalier de Lorraine, stretching himself on his cushions. "Lame," repeated the prince, "and Madame to have her constantly before her eyes? Most certainly not. It may be dangerous for her when in an interesting condition." Chevalier de Lorraine burst out laughing. Chevalier, said Guiche, your conduct is ungenerous. While I am soliciting a favor, you do me all the mischief you can. Forgive me, comte, said the Chevalier de Lorraine, somewhat uneasy at the tone in which Guiche had made his remark, but I had no intention of doing so, and I begin to believe I have mistaken one young lady for another. There is no doubt of it, monsieur, and I do not hesitate to declare that such is the case. Do you attach much importance to it, Guiche? Inquired the prince. I do, my lord. Well, you shall have it, but ask me for no more appointments, for there are none to give away. Ah, exclaimed the chevalier, midday already, that is the hour fixed for the departure. You dismiss me, monsieur? Inquired Guiche. Really, count, you treat me very ill today, replied the chevalier. For heaven's sake, count, for heaven's sake, chevalier, said monsieur, do you not see how you are distressing me? Your highness's signature, said Guiche. Take a blank appointment from that drawer and give it to me. Guiche handed the prince the document indicated, and at the same time presented him with a pen already dipped in ink, whereupon the prince signed. Here, he said, returning him the appointment, but I give it on one condition. Name it. That you make friends with the chevalier. Willingly, said Guiche, and he held out his hand to the chevalier with an indifference amounting to contempt. Adieu, count, said the chevalier, without seeming in any way to have noticed the count's slight. Adieu, and bring us back a princess who will not talk with her own portrait too much. Yes, set off and lose no time. By the by, who will accompany you? Bragelonne and De Wardes, both excellent and fearless companions. Too fearless, said the chevalier. Endeavor to bring them both back, count. A bad heart, bad, murmured De Guiche. He scents mischief everywhere, and sooner than anything else. And taking leave of the prince, he quitted the apartment. As soon as he reached the vestibule, he waved in the air the paper which the prince had signed. Malicorne hurried forward and received it, trembling with delight. When, however, he held it in his hand, Guiche observed that he still awaited something further. Patience, monsieur, he said. The Chevalier de Lorraine was there, and I feared an utter failure if I asked too much at once. Wait until I return. Adieu. Adieu, monsieur le comte. 1,000 thanks, said Malicorne. Send Manicamp to me. By the way, monsieur, is it true that Mademoiselle de la Valliere is lame? As he said this, he noticed that Bragelonne, who had just at that moment entered the courtyard, turned suddenly pale. The poor lover had heard the remark, which, however, was not the case with Malicorne, for he was already beyond the reach of the count's voice. Why is Louise's name spoken of here? Said Raoul to himself. Oh, let not De Wardes, who stands smiling yonder, say even a word about her in my presence. Now, gentlemen, exclaimed the Comte de Guiche, prepare to start. At this moment the prince, who had completed his toilette, appeared at the window, and was immediately saluted by the acclamations of all who composed the escort, and 10 minutes afterward, banners, scarves, and feathers were fluttering and waving in the air as the cavalcade galloped away. End of chapter 7. Recording by Tora.